All right, welcome to the Blue Collar Creative Podcast. Today we have Chance Craven here with us. He's the founder of Honor Supply Co., and he's also a designer and photographer, and he's working to show what first responders are doing and honor them through that. So, Chance, could you just give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Absolutely. Chance Craven, man of faith, family man, currently residing in Greenville, South Carolina. And like you said, founder of Honor Supply Co., where our mission is to honor firefighters by sharing what they do.
Great. How did you get started in that? That's a really unique kind of like statement there. So what does that look like, and how did you get started in that?
Yep. So there really wasn't a defining moment that led to the creation of Honor Supply Co. It was more of a decade of experiences, traveling the country during times of disasters, being friends with several first responders, becoming one myself, and then learning that, hey, there's a need here for first responders, someone to advocate on their behalf that can be trusted, and then share their stories and what they really do. And what that looks like now is I work with various fire departments and training companies, take cameras, go and document real-time stuff, real calls, real disasters, but also the culture of a firehouse. What does it look like when guys are cooking dinner together, talking together, training together? So yeah, it was a slow evolution that seems to have built up a little bit of momentum over the last couple of years, but it's that's what it looks like.
Thank you, Chance, for what you do, for shining a light on that, and it's definitely a necessary thing. And so, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for that introduction. Really excited to have this conversation today.
Honored to be here. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. So I guess, could you walk us through, Chance, how you became a firefighter? Like, what led to that? And obviously you're doing, something different now, but what led to that initial, what was the draw to that?
Yep. So to make a really long story short, my grandparents grew up right next to a firehouse. I could climb a tree in the backyard and see fire engines leaving all the time. And so from a child, I've always been intrigued by the fire service. As life goes on, got a real job, started doing other things. Disaster relief was one of those. In 2015, a disaster happened here in South Carolina, which led me to meet a local fire chief in a town called Irmo. Chief Sonnefeld, just in conversation, briefly shared with him that I always had dreamed of it, but had never become it. He challenged me to become one at the ripe older age of 20s, late 20s, and came home and told my wife, and she pretty much echoed what the chief had said. Yeah, do it. Like, you've always talked about it. Why not go try it? And so I went to, in South Carolina, you have an 8-week academy that you go to, live there, learn everything, get your credentials, and then went to work for a city called Spartanburg here in South Carolina. To date, I would argue that it's one of the better fire departments, made up of some of the best firefighters in the country. And that's where I got to learn and see a lot of the realities of first responders that you don't see in movies and Hollywood, news organizations, and some of that stuff. And not that there's any ill intent from those organizations. They just may have different motives other than solely honoring first responders. And so being a man of faith, kind of prayed through some things, felt challenged to pick up a camera and start doing the very thing that I saw needed to be done. And now here we are, almost 10 years of doing it. Very thankful and excited.
Wow. Awesome story.
Did you have a background in photography before that, or was that something that just kind of like you saw a need and you filled it, or what would that look like?
No, so definitely a background there. I started taking pictures of friends skating and surfing as a teenager, and always found extreme joy in seeing someone's reaction to a photo. And if you take a photo with the intent of honoring someone, pun intended, and they then see themselves doing something cool, learning something, struggling through something, that photo then means something. It's more than a photo. And so photography is something that I've always dabbled in, gotten better at, kind of self-taught. Video, what you guys do, no bueno, can't do it. I don't know anything about video settings. But a camera, a regular camera, photos, I've managed to learn from incredible people and pick up a thing or two along the way to do what I do now. Yeah,
that's awesome. One of the things that we like to kind of highlight is we believe that, blue collar, which is one of the things we're trying to highlight, is also inherently creative, whether it's problem solving or creating, some kind of unique solution to something, or even the craftsmanship that people work with. If you go see a high level woodworker or carpenter, it's like, wow, that's incredible. That's a artist essentially in a way. And it's just through experience. So I guess from firefighting and the other background that you have to the creative side, what are some of those lessons you learned on like the working with your hands side that carry over into the creative?
Yep. So I think you mentioned it even from the blue collar. Problem solving is one of the greatest skill sets I think anybody can learn in any industry, whether it's from creative to blue collar. And the ability to critically think and not just be told, hey, here's instructions A through Z, do this, everything's going to go perfect. You're not going to be missing any screws. You're never going to forget an SD card. You have to be able to be quick on your feet. And so that's one of the things that I think I have learned through experiences. I think experience is the greatest teacher, as most people learn over time. But then with that, authenticity. And I think whether you're a blue-collar brand, a fire department, everyone has their own story. There's unique value in that story. There's no need to copy and replicate everybody else. And so whether you're a very small concrete company doing nothing but driveways and sidewalks, man, focus on that and own it. If you're a creative agency focusing specifically on blue collar, like that's okay. You don't have to do what everyone else does. Own your story. And in a world of ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, I think the value of authenticity is going to continue to increase. And so I would encourage anybody, regardless of the story or the niche or the market that you're in, if you learn how to tell authentic stories through an authentic medium, creative, there's a place for ChatGPT and AI and all that other stuff. But if you really lean into authenticity as a brand, Chick-fil-A's done this really well. Hey, we sell chicken. We're closed on Sundays. We're unashamed about it. This is our story. If more brands could own that and not try to be all things to all people, I think they would find less headaches.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I 100% resonate with that. That's authenticity is so important. It really is. It's something that people resonate with big time. It's a differentiator for sure.
I think it goes back to like what's real, what's true, and when you can see a photo and some of the photos you're about to share as well. When you look at that and say, hey, this was an actual event. These are actual people living in a real world. It's hard to find that on social, especially when even the photos that are real are taken from an inauthentic place where you're trying to look a certain way, appeal to certain people. Marketing has just dominated that, right? Like we want to shape the story and the narrative, but when you snap a photo and say, hey, this is what it looks like, this is real, this is authentic, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of those photos you've taken that have a really deep story to it. It just hits on a whole different level.
And I think it also helps create expectations. And so like thinking blue collar specifically and even fire service, if you get too polished, you start to create an unrealistic expectation. And so if I were marketing a construction company tomorrow and every photo I take is of a brand new piece of equipment, like squeaky clean, no trash anywhere, construction site with no mud, and then you get an 18-year-old kid that has fallen in love with this painted reality onto a construction site where it's hot, it's dirty, Bill left his spit cup in the tractor, it stinks, like all these
that
different
happens
things.
all too often, too.
All too often.
Yeah.
Then we've used this format that could be really good to mislead people. We've created expectations that are false, and then we get upset when someone's like, hey, this isn't what I thought. And the same thing with the fire service. All the content that we create, we give away. Fire departments can then use it to help with recruitment and retention. And we're seeing like a direct correlation between departments that use kind of that polished stuff and they paint a narrative to try to get people in the door. But then once they get in the door, it's like, oh, wow. I thought all you did was like go to an epic car wreck or huge fire every shift, when in reality it's, hey, Miss Smith stubbed her toe and there's another car wreck over here. And So just being authentic with these mediums, I think I could verbally vomit a lot about it, but it's much needed.
Yeah, and I think that's where, for us, we're trying to go in the direction of these authentic documentaries and storytelling, because it allows us the creative freedom to tell those stories authentically and not have it swayed by a brand necessarily. And yes, brands can get behind it and fund it, but I think they'll do it because they know it's going to be an authentic story that resonates with people on a different level, like what we've been talking about. So love what you're doing, Chance. Love the mindset behind that. Just curious, go for it. Yeah.
Well, to your point of brands and sponsoring things, there's an old analogy of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so in the fire service specifically, we're starting to find sponsors that value the idea of honoring first responders. And we're being very candid with them and saying that, hey, if you make ABC axes and you agree to sponsor one of our content days, we may show XYZ axes and never show yours, but people are going to know that you sponsored the story. You have to be okay with that. And I think that's one of the things that more and more brands are starting to own is, hey, it's okay if our product and our gadgets and our widgets and all this stuff isn't shown. We as a brand want to be known for these things. And so that's where I'm really excited to see what brands come alongside of you guys and telling some of these blue-collar stories that, yes, they make incredible products, but they're agreeing with you that, hey, the individual in the story matters. The story itself matters. The impact and legacy of this person matters so much so that we're going to invest in these stories to help you tell them. And I'm seeing more and more brands that want to do that.
Have you always felt that conviction about the integrity and authenticity of a story? Because I think there's the temptation to be like, hey, we'll cater to this brand or cater to that brand. But like when we got into the conversations around the docs, the number one thing for us was just the integrity of the story and protecting that and not skewing it in a specific direction. Because at that point, you lose your audience. You lose the people who are going to watch that and fully embrace like, oh, this is what's happening. But I guess for you, like has there been an evolution in your career from a creative standpoint where you've just come to grips with like, this is the way to do it. This is the right thing to do. And I think some of that can come with experience, but what's your take on that?
So I've always been a believer that trust is built on truth. And if you want to be a brand that is ever trusted, you can never expect that from anyone if you've told anything less than the truth. And so whenever it comes to storytelling and branding and marketing and these things, there's a lot of gigs and opportunities that will pay or even support a mission, but they don't align with core values. And the moment that you start saying yes to those things and justifying, well, we had to pay bills or we couldn't have told the story otherwise, you're now losing the trust of people because you're no longer being truthful. Hey, I love this drill. It's the best drill in the world. But you open your personal drawer, and there's nothing yellow in there or nothing red and black or teal or whatever color it is. Yeah. And so I do think that for me personally, just being raised by incredible family, trust and truth has always been a foundational pillar, and I haven't been willing to sway from that. And I think now in a world of, hey, there's 10 huge agencies that for the longest time controlled all the narratives. Now there's 2 guys in the Midwest and 2 girls in Southern California, and there's all these smaller people that are starting to create based on integrity, and those stories they resonate. So
I love that. Yeah. That's phenomenal.
Yeti's done a really good job of telling authentic stories. And you could watch a lot of their stories, and it's not, well, this cooler kept my ice cold for 3 days. No, it's about Jim that's been bull riding for 10 years, and you see a small glimpse of a cooler in the back of an F-150, but that's it. Well, because of their stories resonating with people, people want to be a part of that community, so they go out and spend an asinine amount of money on a cooler.
It works. Like, they're succeeding at it. So, which I think is proof that you don't have to skew the story, change the narrative. You can tell it authentically, creatively, but authentically, and merge those two and grow your brand through that. And Yeti's a great example of that. The Yeti Presents series is something that we've definitely drawn a lot of inspiration on, and we want to bring a lot of that into the blue collar world, but
and
doing it
that's
at a really cool level.
The product, though, I don't think you can have like super sexy stories and a crappy product, or a really great product and a crappy story.
Sure.
And so in the world we live in, going back to authenticity, if you put out something that's fake right now, the internet's going to eat you alive whether you intend for them to do it or not. And I think one of the unique things about Yeti is they can do some really quality Yeti Present stories, and they can put them out there. But then you still get people that are like, well, I'm going to upload a video of how long ice really stays in this cooler. And without them paying anyone to do it, people are revealing and showing that, well, hey, this ice has been in here for 3 days, or my truck caught fire and my Yeti cooler was in the back and my beer's still cold inside. Like, I don't think you can have one without the other. You have to have authentic stories supported by quality products. And to sell quality products, you kind of got to go into authentic storytelling.
For sure.
That's awesome.
I love that.
Yeti,
I love
if you
that
want to
mission.
sponsor any blue collar stories, these are your guys right here.
There you go.
Thanks
or
for that,
or
Chance.
first responder stories, or that you're over there. All right.
Yeah, and I think that's
so why.
Oh, sorry.
go
Just
ahead,
one final thought on that is, and just to kind of merge the two, is like we're looking to redefine the term blue collar, and it's people who produce with their hands and create with their hearts, right? And that includes the first responders, that includes the construction workers, the trades, the farmers out in the fields, people who value a hard day's work and they know what that can do. And even though it's a challenge, they're willing to take it on and to give it a try and to do their best at it. And to like you've been saying, do it with integrity and authenticity.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's
So,
very
Chance,
much a
why-
first responder.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time.
Go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
Why was it so important? Was that authenticity and that trust level for you? Why was it so important that it was free? What you're offering through your company?
Yep. So a couple reasons. The first being that historically, media is very expensive when done right. And so if an organization comes in and they hire an agency and they want to tell a fire department story, that's thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands, to come in, create recruitment videos, retention videos. And then licensing is so complicated in many ways in today's world of, hold on, you can't use that photo for that reason, or you can't print it, or you can't have the digital file. And so the barrier of entry of a firefighter just receiving a photo was mundane. It was cumbersome. It was like, hey, let's eliminate all that. In the fire service, there's a term, let's make it firefighter proof, where it's so simple that even a firefighter can't mess it up. And so we just said, hey, we're going to give everything away. And the intent of that, again, first step, was just so it was easy. No complications. If a department wanted to pay us to come in and do stuff, they could, but we were going to give it all away. And then in doing that, not watermarking anything, it wasn't long before first responders that we had photographed passed away. And whether that be in the line of duty, a suicide, a motorcycle accident, or a heart attack in the front yard, all four of those situations have happened. I could not, in my right mind, fall asleep at night with a clear conscience if someone ever had to reach out to me and ask to purchase a photo to remember that person. Or, hey, we're going to use this in a funeral program. Can you remove your watermark? And so, again, just making things as easy as possible. It was like, no, we're going to avoid all those awkward situations before they ever arise. Let's just give it away. And then the third part being that I think all great things take time. Nothing happens overnight. And so going back to trust and truth, if I come up to, hey, Ryan, Phil, my name's Chance. I'm going to do all this for free because I want to honor you. We live in a very skeptical world where it's like, BS. Like, nothing in life is free. Like, where's the catch? Da-da-da-da-da.
Yep.
And so by giving it away for free for almost a decade now, it really has become that foundational thing where now there's no question. Like, if someone hears that it's for free And we've traveled as far west as Utah, north as New York, south as Florida. We've been all over the country doing this. And so there's hundreds of firefighters that have received photos, used photos, honored each other with the photos. And now that we're turning it into more of a monetization model, it's not like we're leading with, hey, if you pay us, then we'll do this. Then we'll do what we say we're going to do. No, we spent a decade building a brand on truth and trust. So now whenever we print a magazine, people pay $67.31 to receive a magazine. Now when we say, hey, we're going to buy a fire engine, and it's going to be completely crowdsourced. We need all you guys to help us do it. Almost 300 people give money to a for-profit company, not a charity, and help us buy a fire engine.
Wow.
So it is one of those things where it's like, hey, we're playing the long game here, chess, not checkers, and giving everything away for free was a differentiator from us from the very beginning.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about that fire engine? I've seen some pictures of that thing, and I just think that's awesome that you own a fire engine. So tell us more about like what that's for.
So technically speaking, it is a walk-in rescue. In the fire service world, a fire engine pumps water, sprays water on a fire. A fire truck carries tools and ladders. Some of them have pumps and water, some don't, but they do a lot of rescue work. And then a walk-in rescue, which is what we purchased, is just a rolling toolbox. There's no ladders on it. There's no fire pump. You can't spray water from it. It essentially has like all your extrication tools, your stabilization tools, swift water rescue tools. So it's a big toolbox on wheels. We are going to retrofit that to be what the fire service calls a rehab unit. And anytime we go to a training here locally, a real fire, a real accident, and we drive our fire apparatus there, we're fabricating huge coffee pots on one side, so we'll have hot coffee, stand-up refrigerator, glass door, light behind it, cold energy drinks, water, snacks, stuff like that. And so we'll very much use it to continue honoring and serving firefighters. It just happens to be in a really cool fire apparatus.
It is really cool.
We're going to show some pictures of that as well. I'm sure we can. It's like a pint. So I just pulled it up too on my end. It's sweet looking.
Oh,
that's really exciting.
1989 Ford C8000 chassis, no air conditioning, just like a super sweet turbo diesel on it, straight pipe stack. Like it's a great truck. And being 34 years old, it only has 20,000 miles on it.
Wow.
Like it's been used in the Northeast very rarely with a small volunteer department. So we were very fortunate to find it and acquire it.
So what kind of spawned that idea? What was I'm assuming you're probably out on a shoot somewhere, like, man, if we could just help in this extra way. Like, what kind of started that idea to get the crowdsourcing?
So it actually came from a friend named Jason, who also owns a fire truck. He's a firefighter, but he has his own fire truck. He posted on Facebook, like, hey, here's a walk-in rescue for sale. And I just shared in the comments, man, one day we're going to have one of these, and we're going to outfit it to serve firefighters at all these trainings. And one of the guys I know from Florida, Kyle Foley, he's like, that's a great idea. Tell me where to send money. And I'm like, well, we were going to do that in like a couple of years. This thing's thousands of dollars. And so it's funny because I'd have to go back through like the archive of stories, but I drop it in my Instagram stories. And I'm like, hey, I have not talked to my wife about buying a fire truck yet. Like Kyle said he'd give $100. Can I get like 300 more of you to give money? And instantly it's just like, yes, yes, like heart emoticon, flame emoticon, yes, yes, yes. And my wife responds to the story, hey, if I can help decorate it, whatever that means, I'm game. And so I'm like, wait, what? Are we doing this? And so I called her. We had a real conversation. And she asked all the like logistical things, like, hey, how much does insurance cost on a fire engine? And what's the gas mileage? Where are we going to store an 11'6" tall fire engine? Like that doesn't fit in a home garage. So she asked all the things that a good wife would ask, and
absolutely,
we agreed, like, okay, let's do it. And then in a week's time, we'd essentially raised $20,000 to go out, pay for the fire apparatus, transporting it back to here on the back of a flatbed. It's a wild story, but social media, a lot of good can come from it too.
I think that really speaks to what you're talking about with the trust and truth, though, that authenticity. I think when you have a message that people can see is authentic and it matters and it's important to people, it's surprising how much people get behind the work. Like, you'd never expect that, but you throw that out on social media and people are like, where do I sign up? And
Absolutely.
you'd never expect that, from a situation like you're in, and they just went for it. I think it speaks so much to that trust and to the authenticity of the message and the importance of the work,
And a lot of that comes down to, like, this saying that people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Like, this is where I challenge every fire department, every blue-collar CEO right now is, man, that's not a lie. It's not fictitious. It's not a story. Like, people legitimately want to be a part of something bigger. And not everyone is the leader that's going to stand up and take that charge. And so as companies and brands, if we get really good at communicating a clear message with an objective, we give people a very clear way to get involved. Like, there's nothing that can't be accomplished. And even in Asheville, like with the floods recently, hey, here's an airport. If you have a helicopter, here's where you can land. We will give you what they're referring to as like run cards with longitude and latitude of where you can go rescue someone, pick them up, drop off supplies. You come back here, we'll give you another card. So, like, you have a visionary that doesn't even own a helicopter. They're just at the airport. I can organize this. I can put you on mission. I can send you to do something. And I'm talking about more than 100 helicopter pilots all throughout the country show up in their own helicopter, which is not an F-150. Like, it's expensive to operate.
Yeah, fuel is
They're paying for their fuel.
It's
They're paying all their flight time. And they're not asking, like, hey, who's going to reimburse us? Like, how do we get paid? Someone just shared a vision, gave very clear instructions on how to get involved.
Wow.
And, man, hundreds of people were saved by civilians. And the government did a phenomenal job, too. The North Carolina Heart Team rescued over 500 people. But, yeah, if we lead with clear communication, clear conviction, give clear ways for people to get involved, man, there's nothing that a brand or a company can't accomplish. End rant. Sorry.
Yep.
That's awesome. It's phenomenal.
I think that's also a great segue into, you've been on the ground. You live in South Carolina, correct?
Yep.
So you've been on the ground following first responders through some of the Hurricane Helene relief efforts and some of those, like, first people out. You were following some of that stuff and you were documenting and you were sharing that. And can you just tell us some of, like, what that was like?
Yep. So going back to trust and truth, I had a relationship with the Asheville Fire Department prior to the storm ever hitting. I had presented to their command staff who Honor Supply Co. is, answered a lot of the questions of, well, why do you do it for free and how do you make money? And had recently gone up there and documented 3 days of them training, gave away all the photos, built relationships. And so then prior to the storm, my background in disaster relief, I did not know it was going to be as bad as it was, but I knew that this was going to be a pretty significant storm. And so I'd reached out and said, hey, on Friday, can I come up and document your teams kind of in rescue mode? Absolutely, we trust you, come on. Little did I know that Greenville, where I live, would also be significantly hit. I'm talking thousands of trees down across the road. Took 4.5 hours to travel 2 miles. And so the first week of the storm was documenting a lot of stuff here locally, and then also being able to go up and follow Asheville on what they refer to as a search and recovery. And so I did not get to Asheville until 7 days after the storm. But in that, because it was a trusted media source, I'm allowed to go where other media sources aren't going. I show up with a camera to guys that they're just beat up, they're exhausted, and they're essentially trying to find people that they know they couldn't rescue. And so I'm instantly face-to-face with a firefighter who she attended a training in Orlando that I photographed months earlier. And she sees me and she's like, hey, it's really good to see you today. Like, I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you. Like, you're badass. This is awesome. I appreciate what you're doing. And then another one of the firefighters, man, you're the first familiar face that we've seen in a week. Like, it's good to see you here. And so there's this instant trust, again, built on truth. I didn't have to show up and try to convince them of who I was. That trust was already established previously. And then getting to spend the day with them documenting really just some emotional work, but also tiring work. I mean, they walked 6.5 miles up and down the banks of the river. And whenever I say banks of a river, it's not what we're accustomed to whenever we go on vacation or fly fishing or any of these things. It's a newly formed banks of 4 to 6 feet of mud and debris and Connex boxes flipped upside down, and like just a lot of people have used the word apocalyptic. And having gone to Japan after the tsunami, Haiti after the earthquake, and 30 plus disasters in the United States, I can confidently tell you it's one of the craziest things I've ever seen in North Carolina. And these men and women are with wives and spouses and husbands at home, leaving all them, coming out and doing the very thing that they have agreed and signed up to do. So yeah, since then, been back a couple times just to encourage those men and women, highlight them, kind of how we discovered each other, posting some of it on social media, and sharing a very real, raw, and authentic look into what these first responders are doing. And the post that kind of went viral on LinkedIn was explaining that first day with them a week later, where the city's got no running water, there's no power, and you've got firefighters from across the country, because different task force mobilized to come in and help. And they're walking the banks of the river using their nose to hint that something that they're looking for may be nearby. And it's just this surreal moment of you're walking along. First responders kind of have dark humor. We joke about things that we shouldn't joke about. Very similar to most construction people that I know. And someone will just stop. And it's like, hey, did you smell that? And you kind of wait for the breeze to blow a certain direction or something to settle back down. And then, I smell that too. You call the rest of the team over. You start digging through the bottom of a pile or literally digging through mud that wasn't there weeks ago. And it was such a unique experience because you don't want to find anybody that's passed away. But then there's also like a victory in knowing that, hey, if we find the people that are missing, it brings closure to their families, it prevents someone else from finding this person. And so like there's this, I don't want to say high, but like there's this emotion of, hey, I think somebody might be right here. And then they start digging and they do all this stuff, and it's like, wow, it's just a pack of rotten hamburger meat that floated out of a freezer a week ago and smells like butthole and it has maggots crawling all over it. And so like you're happy it's not someone, but then you kind of wish it was because that's your mission. And then another mile down the river, same story. They're digging through stuff, get to the bottom of a huge pile. That's a dead animal. And it's like, well, glad it wasn't someone, but I wish it was because we're looking for specific people, a list of people that we know are missing. And then on that day, they ended up finding a deceased person that they knew the story. They knew the family members. They knew what happened that caused them to pass away. And essentially it was an unsuccessful rescue because there wasn't enough people. So then there's this heavy weight of like, high five, we found them, but we couldn't save them. And so that's why they passed away. And so there's this eternal wrestle of things that they go through that people just don't understand. And so being able to advocate on their behalf and share these stories is something that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah. I think that's so important too, because they're, sitting isolated from that reality of what kind of toll that is, not just physical, but also the emotional and mental toll that takes on you, knowing the backgrounds of these people and looking for these people, trying to find closure, but at the same time also knowing that, if you could only have had more resources, if you could only have done more, that maybe they'd still be alive. And I think it's big for people to hear that, who don't know that world, like for Phil and myself, for example. It's big for us to understand that, because your exact mission of you're serving first responders and honoring them through showing what they do. And like, it's just big for us to understand what they do and how difficult it is, how challenging that is, and also how important it is.
Yeah. And Chance, I mean, my mind goes to like, what does that even world look like, stepping into a disaster zone like this? You said no running water, no electricity, roofs torn off, houses gone. like it's a very it's worse than third world, right? It's disaster. And they're there to is there even cell service, like cell towers down? Like how do they even navigate, like what's the mindset going into a disaster like this for first responders? And what's the process like to just getting going and starting the job?
Yep. So we mentioned earlier that blue collar people are problem solvers and they use their hands. And truth be told, when something like this happens, and it can go as simple as someone having a heart attack at a baseball game, a house catching fire, first responders hate when bad things happen, but they love that they're in a position to respond. And so even though the majority of the world is like, oh, I can't make a cell phone call, power's out, we have no running water, this is when first responders thrive. They are finally able to be released and go do what they want to do. And so a lot of times people will take offense to, hey, this was a really bad situation and a first responder was smiling. Ma'am, sir, I actually want the one that's smiling because they're calm in chaos. They enjoy being in these moments. They understand high pressure and high risk. So that to preface that when this storm came, the majority of first responders, and not all first responders are the same, just like every carpenter is not the same and every plumber is not the same. You have some that are better than others. The guys that have spent hundreds of hours doing swiftwater rescue training and were yet to ever make a rescue, the moment this happens, man, it is a kid at Disney World. Like, their adrenaline is excited. Their confidence, because of their training, is through the roof. It's not a cockiness or an arrogance. It's, hey, we have prepared for this moment. We're going to go save people. And so you get this, at the very beginning, adrenaline spike like nothing else. And they are saving people, legitimately pulling people out of roofs, out of windows, hugging stop signs, getting them into boats. They saved hundreds of people. And so in the first 72 hours, man, it's crazy. Emotions are everywhere. Everyone's looking at you. There's, hey, good job. Like, oh, we're here for you. And then where I think things start to level off is after 72 hours, even a storm of this magnitude. Well, there's something else on the news today. Oh, did you see Outer Banks' new episode came on? I'm going to watch that. Like, everybody that's living their normal life returns to normal life pretty quickly. Yeah. And now these guys are looking at each other. Hey, Ryan, remember when we saved that person 3 days ago? That was awesome. And so we'll support each other. We keep each other encouraged. But then a week into it, and 2 weeks, we refer to it as the disaster after the disaster. Did you know that only 2 fire hydrants in the city of Asheville work right now? No, wow. Most people don't. Yeah. And so what that means is other agencies are bringing in what's referred to as tanker trucks with 2,000 and 3,000 gallons of water. And now if a house catches fire, what I've been trained to do, I hook to a hydrant and I'm going to have an endless supply of water and I can go in and I can save someone and I can save their house. Hey, we've only got 3,000 gallons of water. We have to conserve that so that if another structure catches fire, we might need that water more than this one. And not that this house is less important, but now we have to start playing chess in a way that you're mitigating risk, you're mitigating disasters. And so it just starts to turn into an emotional toll where you're experiencing things that, hey, it's 3 a.m., it's 2 weeks after the disaster, we live in a firehouse for 24 hours at a time. I have to go downstairs and out back behind the firehouse when it's 33 degrees outside and use a portalet because we have no running water. Can't flush my toilet, can't use a bathroom inside. And so there's all these little things that none of these guys have complained about it. But that's where my heart really starts to go out and want to advocate for them. Because in 2, 3, 4 months, a year from now, whenever one of these men or women are like, I'm struggling mentally. Like, that storm really messed me up. Well, y'all did such a good job. Like, why would it mess you up? Well, because we never shared with you the 2, 3, 4 weeks after it, what we went through, what we dealt with. What it's like to find people that you couldn't save. Like, no one's there to help them process these emotions. And first responders are great at building cliques and being there for each other. And there are a ton of resources whenever it comes to mental health and preparedness and faith and stuff like that. But most people struggle because they feel like no one understands what they're going through. Like, how do you go home and tell somebody, hey, we uncovered a pack of hamburger meat, a dog, and we found a person, but it's okay, like it's just a normal day. You can't talk about it because the people closest to you really don't understand, and you're not in a headspace to explain it without being emotional. So being able to go in and document these stories and share them unbiased, we're going to honor people, here's what it is. The amount of messages we've received of, hey, I didn't realize that's what my husband was doing a week after the storm. Like, I know he's at work, but I didn't know that's what they were doing. One kid messaged me, hey, it's really cool to see my dad doing that. Like, I didn't realize that's what he was doing whenever he was at work. And so it's those things where we're legitimately being able to advocate and give purpose to some of this work. And even the training. Like, man, we document trainings all over the country. And it's so funny because most people think, well, firefighters have the greatest job in the world. They work 10 days a month. They hang out with all their friends. They get to eat food and sleep in recliners. And it's like, no, the very best understand that events like this are very low frequency. They're not going to happen all that often. But when they do, they require a lot of skill and a lot of time. And so they've invested hundreds, if not thousands of hours tying knots, driving boats, putting themselves in as close to realistic situations as possible so that when this happens, they don't become a liability. And it's just hard to unpack that for most people of like, well, why do you sit in the backyard and drive 12 penny nails into 2x4s for no reason? Well, because I want to drive a nail in 2 hits, not 16. And I'm not going to learn that on a job site where people make fun of me. The work that goes into being really good at your job, especially as a first responder, is again something that people don't get, because how often does it flood to this regard and you save hundreds of people? Never. The North Carolina HART team, which is the Helicopter Aquatic Rescue Team, it's a combination of the North Carolina National Guard. They use their helicopter assets, and local first responders. They do a lot of the rescues. It's been documented that they saved more than 500 people in this particular storm, whether it's hoisting them up off the ground, picking them off a roof, or landing and bringing people into the helicopter. At no point in the creation of HART outside of Hurricane Katrina did anyone think that we'd be air evacuating hundreds of people out of the North Carolina mountains. But guess what? Multiple times a year they train for it. They practice. They make sure the hoist is good and everybody can look at each other like, I guarantee you if I put Ryan and Phil in a room, you two have worked together long enough now that you can just look at each other without saying anything. You can kind of guess what the other person wants. Without that happening in the first responder world, you get there and it's like, are you getting the hose or the axe, or am I the extinguisher guy or the medical bag guy? Like, so there's just so much to it that's 15 minutes of verbal vomit. But we're passionate about sharing the realities of this stuff so that even if a small glimpse is revealed to people like yourselves and the general public, and I even learn a ton in these situations, we're advocating on behalf of first responders and honoring them, truly sharing the things that they do.
That's a beautiful, beautiful picture. My mind goes to the firefighters I know personally, and just even having conversations like that, right? Like that opens up my eyes to be able to ask different questions other than like, what did you do today? And, oh, okay, so what is that like? But digging a little deeper kind of gives me some context. And with that context, I think we can open up more of that communication. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Being removed from Asheville or North Carolina or any of the impact areas myself, just what would you say for someone like myself or Phil or anybody in these areas that haven't been directly impacted? How can we support first responders, whether it's our own locally or the ones, across the nation?
Yep. So the thing that I tell everybody is make no assumptions. And if you truly care about somebody, you take the time to listen to them. And Phil, to your point, just asking the right questions, man, we all want to be heard. We all want somebody to ask us our stories. And so if you ask a question with the intent of truly listening and not just to respond, hey, how can I help you? Okay, cool, I'm going to make you hamburgers next Tuesday. Bro, we're all vegan. Like, we don't eat meat. Did you not hear me? Like, so often, if we just slow down enough to, Ryan, I guarantee you within 10 miles of your house, there's a fire station somewhere.
Yep.
You show up, you knock on the door with no pretenses of how you're going to serve them. Hey, we're not going to make a video for you. We're not going to create content. You just show up and say, hey, guys, I was thinking about you this morning. No, it seems awkward. This is pretty awkward for me, but I want to serve you. What does that look like? How can I help you? You might find out that, hey, there's a local firefighter. They just had a baby. Wife's in the hospital still. Baby's not doing well. Man, if you took them a meal, that would mean a lot to us. Oh, well, I would have never thought about that. Hey, man, funny that you show up and ask today. Someone actually broke into our vehicles last night and stole a bunch of stuff from the firehouse. Man, if you just reposted this and helped us find people that stole this, that would go a long way. Like, true stories here. These are things that have really happened. So often, especially with first responders, we think we know how to serve them, and we're not taking the time to ask, how can we serve you? And so the best thing being, hey, if you're passionate about this, go and ask. Go and knock on the door, see what they need, and then be okay with whatever that is. And that's a lot of things that's happening in response to Asheville and some of these things because the disaster is so large. Great people with incredible intent aren't asking, how can I serve you? And they're just doing what they think they know is best.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so you can go to firehouses throughout the Southeast, especially in the first week. Not so much now because we're almost 5 weeks removed. But in the week after, it's like everybody's like, oh, well, we're going to take the local first responders' food. And it's like, ma'am, if we get one more apple pie, like, you're number 19. Like, we're never going to eat all this. Now it's going to waste. And because firefighters are, like, designed, and police officers and EMTs and paramedics to serve, you're actually creating a burden for them, because the moment they go to throw this 4-day-old apple pie in the trash that they haven't been able to eat, it makes them feel bad. Instead, if you were to show up and be like, hey, we love you, praying for you, we're going to come back in 4 weeks when everyone else has forgotten about you, and we're going to cook you food. Is that okay? Oh, Miss Smith, that's awesome. Like, yes. And even right now in Asheville, like, not having water, very good intentioned people show up and they're like, hey, here's 12 ribeyes for the entire station and some potatoes that you can turn into mashed potatoes and some broccoli. Cool. We have no way to wash dishes right now. And so even though your intent was awesome, you've put us in a situation, and they're never going to tell you this. Like, this is the thing that I find so amusing. Is none of them are ever going to be like, well, Ryan, thanks for the donuts, bro. I'm diabetic. Like, you're a tool. Like, they're never going to be rude. But it's these problems that whenever we assume things, we create more issues. And so, to answer your question, Ryan, anyone that wants to serve first responders, just go ask them, hey, you're on my heart, want to serve you, what can I do?
That's great. Fantastic advice. It applies to everyone. You know, it's like people want to be heard, like you said earlier, and it's just important to don't assume and just listen. You know, just ask the right question and listen.
Yeah, and Ryan would be the guy to bring donuts too. So
yeah. Hey, we have this ongoing debate right now in our office. Phil's a pastry guy. I'm a donut guy, and Phil keeps bringing pastries, acting like we're gonna like them more than donuts, and we don't.
No.
And we tell him.
I'm a side.
We make sure he knows
with Ryan on this one.
I'm sure you will. Hey, you haven't tried my local cinnamon rolls from the bakery here. They're to die for. All right, so.
But did you know the Krispy Kreme now makes a cinnamon roll? So now.
What are we going to do?
I'll take a donut any day. So.
I love it.
So one of the other things that you've been kind of vocal about recently in the wake of some of these disasters and other disasters that you've followed up on is just understanding the disaster relief stance that your local politicians have or your local elected officials have. And can you just like give us kind of an insight into that? Because I don't think people really understand that.
Yep. So as it pertains to disaster specifically, everything starts on a local level. And so I'm not going to say anything bad about the federal government, FEMA, or any of these organizations because I understand how they work. And for a federal entity or organization to come in and help at the state level, the state has to request that asset. The state can't do that until a local entity, county, municipality, ward, whatever it may be called, where different people live, request state assets. And so there's essentially a chain of command that has to be followed for these assets to come in. And whenever you're watching the news and you hear things like presidentially declared disaster, well, that means that a county basically said, hey, state, we can't handle this by ourselves. We need help. A state then mobilizes resources to help. And when they're at their capacity, they then say, hey, federal government, we can't handle this ourselves. We need help. And as it pertains to this disaster, what that looks like is hurricanes are kind of unique because you know they're coming. And so there's a potential to request assets before things get bad. That's why sometimes you'll hear, especially the state of Florida, the governor there is very good at saying, hey, we know this is going to be bad. We're going to go ahead and declare a disaster. And then that kind of unlocks resources. And in the United States, you have federal task force teams. And these are New York, New Jersey, Utah, different Texas. There's multiple federal teams that the federal government, once activated, can mobilize these task force teams. And they are self-sufficient for a certain amount of time. They come in with tents and food, and they can mobilize very quickly. I'm talking about, hey, federal team, we need you tomorrow. 80-plus members of that federal team are in SUVs and semis, and they're traveling hundreds of miles throughout the night, and they show up with the city, and they can serve, they can do structural collapse rescues, they can do all these different things. But that doesn't happen immediately. It is a chain of events that occur to request and kind of get those resources. And if you're late to the game in a situation like this, not saying that anyone was late, but whenever multiple states are affected, if another state has requested resources before you, it may be that, hey, we're going to spin up a team to help you, but that task force team is already going past through your state to help another state. So it's why I encourage everybody on a local level and find out how your local officials support first responders. Did they vote no to the rescue boats? Because when was the last time we had a rescue? Well, it's been 10 years, but it might happen. And again, there's a lot of just fallacy in the first responder world of first responders not doing much because events don't happen that often. But mitigation is a huge part of first responder world and preparing for these things. And whenever you take and funding away from that, you're really preventing people from getting what they need when something bad happens.
So what kind of questions should we be asking? Things should we be looking for from our local officials as we try and figure out where they're at on those things and, what decisions to make?
Yep. So I think because now we're kind of going into advocacy. And, hey, if you're going to vote based on how someone supports first responders, you have to understand locally, what does support for a first responder look like? And so here in South Carolina, we have coast, we have mountains, and then in the Midlands, we have a ton of farming. And in farming communities, grain rescues are a very real thing. They require a ton of skill. You can't just throw someone into a grain bin and pull them out easily. Like the weight and complexity of a grain rescue is very unique. And so if you talk to your local fire department and you find out that, man, we have no equipment if Farmer Tom falls into a grain bin to save somebody, and we've been voted down on that 3 times now, that's where I would say, hey, local official, as a taxpayer who lives in a farming community, this has been voted no on 3 times, what do we do? And so that's like on a very small local city level. On bigger levels, the news is doing stories on some of the issues in the fire service right now. If you Google right now, and nothing against anybody in Chicago, but hey, sitting Chicago fire trucks, there's news stories in the last 7 days of news cycles where there are more fire trucks sitting in basically the yard, the lot, the parking garage of the Chicago Fire Department needing to be fixed because they don't have the resources and the manpower to fix everything and keep up. And so here's one of the largest fire departments in the country that if I lived there, I would just be like, local officials, why can't we go hire 5 more mechanics? Like, where's the funding for that? And as it relates to politics, it's so much more complex than even this conversation, because a politician has to think about first responders and safety, but also education and healthcare and public transit and roads. And so it is very hard to do everything well. And more times than not, everyone thinks first responders are well off, they're taken care of, everything's great on that front, because they're not the squeaky wheel. They're not the one complaining about stuff. It's, hey, here's the 5 neighborhoods that we don't have lights to play football. And so that's what they advocate for, because that gets them more votes. And again, first responders being problem solvers and blue-collar people being problem solvers. Hey, we didn't get voted in, and we need all these fire trucks fixed. Jim's coming in on his 48 hours off, and he's going to change the oil and everything, and we'll just keep being quiet and take care of it ourselves. So I think it varies, but it's locally find out what your first responder needs and then advocate on that.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful, because it's one of those things, again, like, I've never thought about it, and it is important stuff, because like you said, it could be a matter of we don't have the tools to do a rescue, or we don't have what we need for this fire, for this disaster, and it's like, well, nobody was thinking about it.
Yep.
and that's the worst
we live
spot
in a
you wanna be
world
in.
where it's easy to pass the blame to other people. The higher up government often receives a lot of that blame. But man, if you went to your local communities and you ask the electrician, how easy is it to apply for licensing and permitting right now? Well, that's not a federal level. That's a state and local level. Hey, how easy is it to get building permits? How easy is it to get an inspection done before I pour a concrete slab? Well, we have one inspector in our town, and he's 3 weeks out, so now my construction project's going to sit here for 3 weeks. Like, there is so much that happens on a local level that if there were anybody that's under the age of 30 listening to this, like, really learn and understand how local politics affect every aspect of your life, from the tax you pay on fuel to the building of a home. In South Carolina, we refer to them as impact fees, like what builders will pay in new subdivisions to help support first responders and these different things. There's so much that happens at a local level that affects all of us, not just in the first responder world, but school and safety and like so much. If people got more involved on that level, I think we'd see a lot more change in areas.
Yeah, that makes me think of, I was sitting in a board meeting recently for something, and someone said something that was very, very wise. Is we were talking about a situation that needed to be remedied and trying to come up with solutions, and one of the members said, we would all feel really silly if this came down to just a communication issue at the end of the day. Like we tried to find all these solutions, and it was like, well, we just should have communicated it with everyone that needed to know, so that we knew, hey, we've exhausted all options, we've made everyone aware of what's going on, and we didn't drop the ball on just, hey, we were talking about it. So I think that's kind of the same sentiment for disaster relief, is like, we'd feel really silly if it came down to the fact that, like, we didn't have what we needed because we weren't talking about it. So I think that's why that's really important.
Absolutely.
So I think, you being a photographer, I think it'd be awesome to go through some of the photos. I know you've gone through a couple and prepared some that you can share with us that have some stories behind them. I think we'd love to hear those stories.
Yeah, we'll share these really quick. Yeah, so this first photo here is actually one of the photos from Asheville. And this is looking across, I can never pronounce the name of the river, so I'm not going to try it.
A river.
Google it. Google it. It's the river that flooded in Asheville.
Wow.
A train car behind them. You can actually see this is a bathroom sign right here. So this used to be a structure, and this is brewery equipment over here. There's a brewery in the background. Water is not forgiving. Water will bend steel. Water will collapse Connex boxes. And some of the firefighters in this photo, this one here is actually from Raleigh, not from Asheville. Part of the task force that came in to help. Some of these firefighters were on shift the morning of the flood. But I specifically chose this photo because when you think firefighter, you think bunker gear and sweet fire helmet and an axe. And just in this photo, he's actually wearing chainsaw chaps. He has gloves on. This is, we call it a Team Windy communications chesty. He's got radios in here and a helmet on. And in this particular photo, they've been walking up and down the banks of the river all day, kind of doing that recovery mission that we referenced earlier. Chaps on because the debris piles are so big and trees are so twisted that sometimes to walk even another foot, you are running a chainsaw and doing it safely. And so many fire departments in this, really the country, you might have 3 chainsaws, you might have 5 chainsaws at a very well staffed and funded department. Where I live, local agencies were buying hundreds of chainsaws at a time. And thanks to a local company called Safe Industries, like sourcing all those and bringing them in, we were able to put chainsaws in the hands of first responders to do it. But that's another, like, one of those small specifics that you don't think about until you know something new.
Yeah.
And first responders need chainsaws, and not like 12-inch chainsaws either. Like half these trees were as big as cars falling. And so, hey, how often are you going to use a chainsaw steel 881 with a 40-inch bar on it? Well, probably once a year, but when I need the darn thing, I need it because I can't get through this tree otherwise.
There's no other way.
Same thing with the UTV. They're sitting on the back, has tow strap tied to the front of it right here. You don't necessarily think UTVs and side-by-sides whenever you think about first responders, but whenever something like this happens and the integrity of a bridge is suddenly damaged, well, we're not going to drive a huge vehicle filled with thousands of pounds of water over the bridge and the bridge possibly collapse. Like, we could walk across it. We're going to take a small gamble and drive a side-by-side across it. Or, hey, this huge tree is fallen. It's going to take way too much time to clear a road big enough for a huge apparatus to fit through. Guys were jumping on these side-by-sides with medical bags and the absolute necessities and going out and doing what needed to be done. So a lot to be said in this photo of
you said that's a train in the background, Chance. Like, that's a literal train, and you said where are the tracks? Like, where's the rest of the train? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, that's a floating cylinder of air in a flood. And again, that used to be a brewery right there with now a train car sitting on top of it. And so when a flood happens, and I don't take a lot of pictures of the damage because there's so many other people that have documented that really well and can show that extent.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go and look at some of the video and the drone footage of this particular river that cuts through Asheville, man, you have mobile homes that are in trees. You have RVs that are just the tongue of the trailer sticking up out of the water. Whenever the flood came through at the edge of the river was what we typically all drive by in our cities, which is like a U-Haul place that has 10 and 15 U-Haul trucks out front. Well, if you think about a U-Haul truck, it's a huge box of air. And so it only takes 2 or 3 feet of water to suddenly lift this floating box up. And then there's just U-Haul trucks littered throughout this river. So yeah, a flood is so unique in that you will not stop water. Like, it will remove bridges, it bends steel, everything that we learned in school of like, hey, steel is the strongest material. Nah, bro. Like, water will bend it in a heartbeat. And so in this particular storm, you have Connex boxes that have like wrapped around trees and pylons. You have steel beams that have bent. So yeah, it's not an everyday occurrence by any means.
Yeah. Oh, really interesting picture. Yeah. Crazy.
So another photo not related to Asheville. This is an ambulance that had responded to a motor vehicle accident at about 4:30 in the morning where someone was ejected from the car. Car flipped, sitting in the middle of a 3-lane interstate. Traffic suddenly begins to back up. And so first responders oftentimes have to make decisions very quickly that best serve the people that they're trying to help, but that other people may deem reckless or unsafe. And in this situation, these fire trucks and ambulances are now coming towards head-on traffic and using the right-of-way and the shoulder to get to the victims faster. because if they were to follow the normal rules of the road, they would end up at the back of a traffic jam that people have pulled over to try to see if they can see where it stops, and they're blocking the right of way. So this ambulance comes towards head-on traffic, gets to the patient where firefighters were already performing CPR, quickly loads him on a stretcher into the back of the ambulance. In this photo, there's actually somebody with a safety vest in the ambulance performing CPR, and these firefighters are now helping back up the ambulance, really going the wrong way, to get turned around and then head towards the hospital.
Wow.
So it's another one of those situations that, especially in America, we have a driving problem, and most people don't know how to drive. And so we get very upset whenever there's traffic backed up. We don't pull over for emergency vehicles like we should. And a lot of times it's these seconds that matter. And so I use this photo a lot just to educate people of like, hey, man, there's a reason that they have the road closed. You may not realize it, but 2 miles down the road, there's a fire truck driving towards us because this was the quickest way for them to go. Slow down. Don't drive around the cones. Like, just chill out for a minute. Something's happening that you don't know about. Unfortunately, the person they were trying to save in this photo did not make it. So,
wow.
And then this photo, just talking about it being more than a photo, this is my friend Justin Daly. And Justin is an absolute unit of a firefighter. Like, built. He's the guy that if you call 911, you want him coming to serve your family. Actually have photographed Justin at multiple events before this one where he shows up and he does like the hard trainings. He's not the guy sitting on the sidelines. He's putting himself in high heat situations. He's exerting a ton of energy. He's learning from people that have done it longer than him. And I took this one at a fire conference called the Orlando Fire Conference. And this particular training, Justin's doing something called a hoarding class. And imagine a standard Connex box that a lot of blue-collar people store materials and stuff like that in. They fill this Connex box with bicycles and couches and clothes because more people than you realize live in hoarder conditions. And so a lot of times in Hollywood and movies, firefighters will go in to rescue someone and it's a clean floor and they can walk straight to them. The reality is if a house is on fire, most people have not lived how some of us live, and their house is a mess. And so in a blacked out condition, black smoke, hundreds of degrees, this training, Justin's advancing over these bicycles, going and finding a downed firefighter, packaging them, and trying to remove them out.
Wow.
Prior to this training, Justin was training and passed out. And wasn't feeling good, didn't think much about it, didn't say anything because firefighters are tough on each other and didn't want anybody to point out his weaknesses. After this training, though, he went back home and said, hey, I'm going to replicate what I did to pass out to see if I pass out again. And because never have I said firefighters are the smartest people in the world, just some of the hardest working. And Justin passes out again, tells his wife, hey, I think something's wrong. He goes to the hospital. Long story short, finds out that he has a brain tumor. And so Justin sends me this photo, and a text, and just says, hey, man, I wanted to thank you for this photo. You may not realize it, but this may be the last photo ever of me in gear. Since you took this, I've been diagnosed with this brain tumor, about to start chemo and all these other things. And so going back to that trust and authenticity, that was something where, with Justin's permission, I said, hey, man, you didn't share this to ask for help, but you have a story. I want to advocate on your behalf, and I want to make sure that you're taken care of. And there's kind of a firefighter group called the Yard Foundation. They saw the story. They're like, hey, man, let's raise a whole bunch of money for this guy in a week and like overnight him a check so that he knows he's not alone in this. And in 5 days' time, people from as far away as Alaska threw money into a pot. And 5 days after Justin sent me that text, he got a check for $27,343. Of, again, people that they're not donating to a charity. They're not asking for a tax write-off. It's way more valuable than us purchasing a fire truck. But it goes back to that clear communication. Here's a narrative. Here's a story. Here's how you can get involved. And we were very upfront with people, telling them, like, hey, Justin's got insurance. A lot of these medical bills are going to be taken care of. But in the moment, you might pay off a vehicle. You might buy ice cream for his kids while they're going through this. Like, there may be a memory foam pillow that he wants from the store. Like, we're going to help with whatever they need it for. There's no limits on how they spend this money. And people are like, nah, like, he's awesome. We're going to throw in money to this. So just shows the power of a photo and a story.
Yeah. That's phenomenal. Wow. Inspiring, too. Thanks for taking these, Chance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I get to ride on fire trucks still. I get to hang out with incredible men and women that I want my sons to be like. And then I don't have to deal with any of the bureaucracy and politics that we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
Because I get to show up, have fun, and then I get to come back to my house. I don't have to deal with the real problems. So, I'm very fortunate to be able to do what I do.
That's important work. So
I hear a siren somewhere in the background right now.
So actually, we live in a small town in Michigan, and this siren goes off all the time, and it's anytime there's a fire. Actually,
okay.
So, and on the Facebook page when we first moved here, we were like, "What the heck is going on?" Like, we just moved here at the beginning of the year, and there's some people who freshly move in, and they're like, "Why is this going off?" Like complaining about it. But it's really cool to see the entire community jump on board and say, this is to save lives. This is to help. Like, and it was, it's actually very timely. So
that's a prime example of, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, many communities had audible alarms like that would then notify the volunteers, hey, you need to come to the station. You need to get in the apparatus. You need to go save somebody.
Yeah.
But now with technology, those have slowly started to dwindle. So selfishly, I think it's cool that you live in a community that still operates a siren like that.
They
so
still
that people
do
know what's going on.
Some people are probably like, give me that technology, and others are like, no, that's how we've always done it. So
Yeah. That's awesome. So I think, Chance, so we don't take up too much of your time, I think it'd be cool to close with you kind of giving your, as someone who's been a first responder and then transitioned into, showcasing and honoring and serving first responders. What would you say to somebody who's kind of like, hey, this may be a career path for me, being a first responder? Like, how would you encourage them, and what would you tell them to look into to get more information?
Yep. So every fire department in the country is different, and so I'm not going to say that they're all awesome and great. I will say that if you have a passion to serve others, and when I say serve, I mean everything from picking up naked drunk people off the side of the road to running into burning buildings, there is a call to service. And if you live in a community that you want to serve in, whether that's law enforcement, fire, EMS, there's a persona of first responders that they're very hard and unapproachable. That's not the case. Most of them are just tired and exhausted. If you're interested, go to any of them and just ask questions. They want you to come work for them. They want you to come be a part of the team. They need more people, and they are willing to answer your questions, do ride-alongs, all of those various things. But if you have a desire, I would encourage you to go speak to people, ask questions. Don't make assumptions on what you see of people outside of where you want to serve, because, again, all of these agencies very different based on geographical locations. Phil, prime example, an alarm going off in the background alerting people to come help. There's volunteer roles, there's part-time roles. And then if I could say one thing to really drive home the value of first responders and what I enjoyed about the job is that you get to work with some really incredible people, and no 2 days are the same. There's some similarities in days. Hey, we're going to ride on a fire truck today. We're going to check this equipment each day to make sure it works. But there's a unprecedented chaos that comes with each day that if you enjoy adventure and thrill-seeking and adrenaline rushes, not every day is like that. There's days that you may not get a single call. But I have not found any other profession in the world where you can go from sitting in a chair watching the TV, because first responders do that, to running into a burning building, finding out that there's a baby inside, or a mother or a father, brother, dog, and trying to rescue them. Like, the variables of how a day can go is 100% unpredictable. And so if you thrive in chaos or adventure, man, first responder is definitely something I'd consider.
Awesome. I think that's super valuable insight. There's a lot of people out there wondering what it's like to do something, and like you said, maybe a little hesitant to go up and ask, or don't know where to start to find the information. I think it's really cool to hear from somebody who's been there and just know, here's what it's like, and here's the kind of person that thrives in these kind of environments.
Absolutely.
I think that's super valuable to anybody looking into any career path. Well, thanks for taking the time with us, Chance. How can people follow your journey and get involved with what you're doing?
Yep. Just search Honor Supply Co. on your social media platform, Facebook, Twitter, any of those, or X, Instagram, any of those things. And any of the images we share, we tell everybody, your department, and your family don't have to ask permission, tag us, or anything like that. So if you happen to know any of the first responders that we photographed, take that photo and then publicly honor them. Use it to encourage them. Talk about their awesome mustache. Talk about something funny they've done, like whatever it may be. The greatest way to help us is by honoring the first responders that you know.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Phenomenal.
And where can we buy a hat? That's the other question.
HonorSupplyCo.com.
There it is. There it is.
All right.
There you go.
Order coming in soon.
Yeah. Chance, love what you're doing. Godspeed as well in all of your endeavors. It's awesome to see you put your faith first as well, and share that with the world, and really seems to drive your mission and values, and making a difference out there. So keep going.
I appreciate the opportunity and the kind words, gentlemen.